It was a night like any other in the accounting office of the company where I worked. The rain fell incessantly outside, creating a gloomy atmosphere that seemed to permeate the solid brick building. I was the only employee who remained after business hours, dedicated to solving the countless numbers and equations that made up the company's financial statement. This was the kind of work that often made me lose track of time, but I was used to the long, lonely nights at the office. The clock on the wall said midnight, and the echo of my fingers typing on the calculator echoed through the office. The silence that enveloped the building was profound, only interrupted by the monotonous sound of rain hitting the windows. The world outside seemed distant and inaccessible, while I was buried in that mountain of spreadsheets, invoices, and reports. I was brought out of my daze by the feeling that something wasn't right. Initially, I thought it was fatigue playing tricks on my mind. But as I continued to work, the whispers began to creep into my focus. They were distant murmurs, indistinct whispers, like voices muffled by the wind. They were so faint I could barely make them out, but somehow I knew they weren't a figment of my imagination. Curious and, at the same time, disturbed, I got up from my chair and walked towards the hallway. The whispers seemed to come from somewhere far away, and curiosity compelled me to investigate. The dim light in the hallways made everything seem even more surreal, as if I were walking through a nightmare. As I approached the office that was usually empty at night, the whispers became clearer and more disturbing. They were human voices, but they carried an indescribable anguish. Lamentations, pleas, and evil laughter mingled jarringly, creating a cacophony of horror. I now stood before the locked office door, where the whispers seemed to emanate. With a feeling of apprehension, I looked for the master key in my set of keys and, with shaking hands, unlocked the door. It creaked as it was pushed, revealing a scene I never would have imagined. The office was plunged into darkness, but the source of the whispers was clear. In the center of the room, there was an ancient music box, slowly rotating on a dusty table. It was adorned with intricate details, but time and neglect had left it covered in dirt and cobwebs. The melody the music box played was eerie, nothing like the soft, comforting songs I was used to hearing from these devices. It was a melancholic lament, as if suffering itself was woven into its notes. A chilling feeling of unease ran down my spine as I realized I wasn't alone in the room. As I watched the music box, the light bulbs on the ceiling began to flicker, and unsettling shadows seemed to writhe across the walls. My heart raced, and the feeling that something terrible was about to happen overwhelmed me. I stood frozen, unable to look away from the cursed music box that continued to spin, as if hoping to reveal its darkest secrets. The dark room seemed to be the epicenter of that strange disturbance. Shadows danced on the walls, and the macabre melody of the music box echoed in the air. I decided to approach that enigmatic relic, keeping my eyes fixed on it, while a feeling of uneasiness grew within me. The music box was a magnificent piece of craftsmanship, adorned with intricate details, but now it was covered in dust and cobwebs. The tones of the melody were discordant, and it was as if the music penetrated my soul, bringing to the surface an inexplicable anguish. My trembling fingers reached for the box, and I carefully stopped the music by closing the lid. The room fell into a sepulchral silence, but the air was still filled with palpable tension. I looked around, trying to understand what was happening, when I realized that the whispers that had led me there were still echoing in my ears. The feeling that something was wrong didn't leave me, and a question hovered over my mind. What had triggered those disturbing murmurs and that ominous presence? And what was that music box, and why was it hidden in the room? I decided the best way to get answers would be to investigate the history of the music box and try to understand what had happened in that office. I spent hours combing through the company's archives and records, searching for any mention of the music box or mysterious events in the past. It was then that I found a name, Robert Adams. Robert Adams was a former employee of the company who had worked in the same office as me. Information about him was scarce, but it was rumored that he had died under mysterious circumstances many years ago. Apparently, he was obsessed with his music box, which he used to take with him to work every day. With this new information, I dove even deeper into the search for the truth. I spoke to older colleagues and met people who had worked alongside Robert. They told me stories about how he would spend hours on end listening to the melancholy melody of his music box, and how he always seemed far away, as if he were in another world. As I investigated, the office lights began to blink intermittently, as if something was trying to communicate with me. It seemed like the office itself was trying to reveal its darkest secret. The shadows continued to move, taking ominous shapes on the walls, as if they were trying to tell a story that had long been buried. On one particularly terrifying night, when the shadows twisted and the lights flickered more brightly than ever, I knew something was about to happen. The music box, which I had stopped, began to rotate by itself, as if it were being played by invisible hands. The macabre melody returned, and the disturbing voices I had heard earlier became louder, clearer, as if they were crying out for attention. It was then that an ethereal figure began to form before my eyes, in the center of the room. It was a ghostly apparition of a man, his face distorted in agony. He stared at me with empty eyes, and I could feel the despair emanating from it. My throat was dry, and my heart was beating wildly. The figure bore a disturbing resemblance to the few photos of Robert Adams I had found during my investigation. He was there, in front of me, as if he was trying to convey a message to me. The music box melody continued to play, and the voices I had heard before were now clearly audible, whispering dark secrets that sent chills down my spine. Robert didn't say a word, but his intention was clear. He wanted me to know the truth behind his death and the curse that befell the music box. The apparition of Robert, the ethereal figure that manifested before me, kept his empty eyes fixed on me. It was as if he was trying to tell me something, but his mouth remained still. The disturbing music from the music box continued to play, echoing in my mind and increasing the feeling of terror that enveloped me. I didn't know if I was dreaming, hallucinating, or facing a supernatural reality, but one thing was certain: it wasn't normal. The office, once so familiar, had now become a place haunted by a sinister presence. The overhead lights flickered, casting jagged, unsettling shadows that danced around Robert. He let out a silent wail, and his anguish was palpable. I could feel his despair penetrating my soul, as if he was transmitting his agony directly to me. Trying to stay calm, I took a deep breath and decided that I needed to know more about Robert and what had happened to him. He still hadn't said a word, but something in his empty eyes told me he wanted justice, redemption, or maybe just liberation. I dug deeper into company records for information about Robert Adams' death. The news was vague, but there were mentions of an incident that occurred at the office many years ago. Apparently, Robert had been found dead in his own office, under mysterious circumstances, and his death had been classified as unexplained. There were no details about what had happened that fateful night, but Robert's death remained shrouded in mystery. The feeling that Robert was trying to tell me something was overwhelming. Looking again at the ghostly figure, I began to realize that the curse binding him was related to the music box. The ominous melody that echoed from her was somehow a link to her suffering and inexplicable death. As I tried to unravel the mystery, the room seemed to come to life. Dark shadows seemed to move around Robert, and the previously hushed whispers intensified, as if they were telling the story of his death. It was as if the office itself was trying to reveal the secret that had been kept hidden for so long. I knew I could no longer ignore Robert's presence and the curse that imprisoned him. Whatever was tormenting him, he was determined to use it so that his story would finally be told and his torment ended. One night, while I was deep into research, something extraordinary happened. Robert, the ghostly figure, reached out toward the music box and, with a slow, solemn gesture, made it start playing again. The disturbing melody filled the room, and the energy in the air grew even more intense. As the music echoed, terrifying visions began to appear in my mind. I saw flashes of what had happened the night of Robert's death. He was in his office, listening to the music box, when a dark presence appeared and attacked him. The scene was chaotic and confusing, but it was clear that he had been murdered. What I was witnessing was the memory of the night of his death, preserved in the melody of the cursed music box. The music continued to play, revealing more and more details of the tragedy that had unfolded in that office. Terror gripped me as I realized that somehow Robert was using the music box and his presence to spread his story and his quest for justice. I didn't know how to break the link between him and the music box, but I knew I needed to find out quickly before it was too late. The curse that hung over the office was scarier than anything I could have imagined. With each revelation, the intensity of the terror I felt increased exponentially. It was as if Robert was trusting me to reveal the truth behind his death, to finally find justice and redemption. However, I had no idea how to accomplish this daunting task. The horrific visions from the night of his death continued to play out before me as the music box continued to play its maddening melody. The shadowy figure that had attacked him remained elusive, a menacing presence that seemed eager for its secret to remain hidden. The story unfolding before me was disturbing. Robert had been murdered in his own office, but the circumstances and motive for the crime were still a mystery. The visions were confusing and chaotic, with Robert fighting his attacker while the music box melody echoed in the background. As I watched the terrifying scene, I began to understand the truth. Robert was connected to the music box in some inexplicable way. The sinister melody she played was a link to his tormented soul. To help him find peace and end the curse hanging over the office, I would have to break that bond. I went back to research, scouring old books and the internet for clues on how to exorcise an evil presence and free a trapped soul. It was uncharted territory, filled with conflicting information and sinister rituals. In time, I found a ritual that promised to free Robert and break the bond with the music box. It was a complex process that involved creating a circle of protection with salt, lighting candles, and burning incense while reciting ancient words of exorcism. Every detail was crucial, and the smallest mistake could have devastating consequences. I gathered the necessary ingredients, including candles, incense, salt, and other ritual objects. Everything was ready for the decisive night. I knew I had to face my fears and help Robert find the peace he so desperately wanted. Not just for him, but also to free myself from the curse that had spread over me since that dark night. On the chosen day, I returned to the office after business hours. The night was darker than ever, and the sound of rain falling outside echoed through the deserted building. I lit the candles and incense, forming a protective circle around the music box, which remained silent and ominous. I began to recite the words of the ritual in a firm voice, begging for redemption and release for Robert. As the words echoed through the office, the candles flickered, and the music box began to shake. The snare melody, once melancholic and disturbing, became more frantic, as if resisting the exorcism that was taking place. The entire office seemed to shake, and the shadows danced frantically, as if in agony. The dark presence that had attacked Robert on the night of his death became sharper, more menacing. It was as if she was struggling to maintain her hold on the music box and Robert. My heart was beating wildly, and fear took over me. The music box melody continued to grow in intensity, as if it was about to fall apart. I recited the words of the ritual with determination, resisting the dread that threatened to overwhelm me. Then, something extraordinary happened. The entire office seemed to shake in a last-ditch effort, and the music box exploded into pieces. The melody stopped abruptly, and the office returned to silence. The dark presence disappeared, and the shadows dissipated. I remained in the protective circle, panting and shaking, waiting to see if the exorcism had worked. The office was silent, and the fear that had tormented me was gone. The curse that befell the place seemed to dissipate along with the music box. Since that night, the office has remained peaceful. I never saw or heard from Robert or the music box again. The curse had been broken, and the dark secret that had haunted the place for so long had finally been revealed. However, the memories of that terrifying night never left me. The world was full of dark secrets and hidden mysteries, and I had learned that sometimes it's best not to disturb them, for the consequences can be scarier than any nightmare.